So I'd now like to welcome all of you to the IEEE Consultants Network of Silicon Valley monthly meeting for June of 2021. Oops. I am Christopher Wilson. I'm the chair of IEEE Consultants Network of Silicon Valley, and we are sponsoring today's event. CNSV is an agile resource of over 200 consulting engineers available for consulting around the world, but focused here in Silicon Valley. Tonight's talk is going to be provided by Tom Coughlin of Coughlin Associates. He will be talking about Work Unleashed, the Unbounded Limits. Tom has spent last several months trying to figure out what work looks like in the future, and he is going to be telling us about that for the rest of today, or during this talk. As I mentioned earlier, if you have questions for Tom, please put them in the Q&A list here on Zoom. So Tom Coughlin is a digital storage analyst and business and technology consultant at Coughlin Associates with over 40 years of experience in the data storage industry. He has held engineering and senior management positions at several companies, puts on events focused on digital storage, and publishes books and market and technology reports, including the Media and Entertainment Storage Report and an emerging memory report. Tom is a regular storage and memory computer for Forbes storage blog and M&E organization websites, and is also active with SNIA, that's the Storage Network Industry Association, and the Society for Motion Pictures and Television Engineers. Dr. Coughlin is an IEEE fellow and will be is a candidate this year for IEEE President-elect. So that election comes up later this year. Please be IEEE members, please be sure to vote. He has been president of IEEE USA in the past. He's been a director of IEEE Region 6 and Santa Clara Valley Section Chair. He is currently a CNSV at-large director and has been involved with CNSV for many years. So we're very happy to have Tom giving this talk. And at this point, I'm going to pass it over to you, Tom.
Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks everybody in CNSV for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. So this actually has been a topic that is of interest to me, and I have been struck by, a lot of things have been going on with the pandemic, and so I've done some research. There's a few references I'm going to be giving here, and also I've been involved in some discussion with a group that's been talking to people around the world about what's going on. So I'm going to sort of try to synthesize this and give some ideas that I've been having and thoughts I've got on, what's happening with work. Here's an outline of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about what was going on before the pandemic hit, some of those trends, and also something that's called, it's a buzzword called digital transformation. I also talk about then what happened when COVID hit us, and then getting into some things that I think will be interesting on, technology for future work. Especially work that's going to be remote. I think that some of the trends that have started during the pandemic, and actually even before the pandemic, are probably going to be there afterwards as well, and new technologies will help on that. Then what the impact of these technologies and these changes in the way that we work would have on mankind and on the world around us. And then finally, some summaries and some references that may be of interest. So first of all, let's talk about things that were going on when COVID hit us early last year, and also related to this concept of digital transformation. So digital transformation is a marketing term. It's a buzzword, and it describes the integration of digital technologies into all areas of a business. So that includes digital records, keeping everything digital instead of paper, automation, use of AI, verifiable supply chains, for instance, using blockchain technology. It involves advanced telecommunication, Internet of Things, applied especially to industrial applications, but also to service the consumer market. Increases in digital security because more things are connected, they're digital, they're accessible through the net, and anything else related to the use of digital technology for business applications. It's said that this will fundamentally change business operations and how value can be delivered to customers. It's also said to require a change in culture, that organizations essentially will be perpetually disrupted need to challenge the status quo. Experimentation and trying to find things that work will be needed, and also getting comfortable with failure, because some things won't work, and recovering quickly from that is the way to learn to succeed. And this might also, another thought here, include increasing use of, for instance, sustainable energy, reducing carbon emissions, and also reducing the overall consumption of raw materials by more efficient manufacturing, recycling, and other processes. In fact, there's an interesting book, I've got it in the references, that places where we've had increasing amounts of technology actually use less natural resources. There's a book by a guy named Andrew McAfee from MIT called More from Less. Gets into that idea. So it's possible that advances in technology will actually involve us using less resources, certainly less resources for common things that we do. I've got a question here, but I'm going to wait on that for later on, okay? And so one of the sources I looked at, there's actually a talk by some folks from Deloitte at its 2021 CES, which is a virtual event, that I thought was very interesting. And I'm going to show a few slides that from that talk, just to give that attribution. And here's some things that he was pointing out, trends before COVID-19 hit us, that there are about 20 million manufacturing jobs around the world that could be replaced by robots by 2030. That's their projection. 77 million workers were identified as freelancers. Actually, if you include consultants in that, that's you, many of you and me. In Europe, India, and the United States, 65% of children entering primary school today, they project will end up working in completely new job types that don't yet exist. So that's an interesting trend there. 173% increase in the percentage of people in the United States who regularly work from home since 2005. Again, this is before the pandemic. And 3 times the amount of female leaders at companies that enable flexible working compared to traditional companies. And, companies that enable flexible working have more women working for them. And there's a 13% increase in productivity realized from working from home, according to Deloitte, or almost an extra day of output per week. So there's some interesting trends there that actually might favor some of the things that, as we get into COVID, have become more commonplace, although there also are complexities. And not everyone is able to take advantage of this. We'll talk more about that. So let's talk now about the impact of COVID. So when when the pandemic hit us early last year, we couldn't travel. People couldn't go to offices. The streaming applications, as shown here on the upper right-hand side, really bumped up in March timeframe from February, when around here, for instance, things closed down. So they did really well. There still is an awful lot of people that are they can't go to movie theaters. They're watching streaming applications. Another thing is, of course, we turn to teleconferencing like we're doing right now. So video meetings increased enormously during this time, because they're basically the only way in which we can interact with each other. So this is a prime example of the application of technology to deal with the issue of how, even though we're isolated physically from each other, how do we continue to work? How do we continue to collaborate with other people? Technology has been a key point in doing that. When people were physically working during the pandemic, there were new safety and health measures taken. For instance, I do some stuff on storage and media and entertainment. So this is an entrance to a video set in 2020, a video production set. They had extra measures, as many other places did, to help prevent and avoid infections. This is a universal set entrance. They had temperature monitoring, for instance, for people going into and out of the set. Social distancing, wearing masks, cleaning various gear, including storage cards and exchange media. I talk about storage in these applications, were important elements in maintaining a safe workplace. So uploading content to online sources for remote proxy viewing, that's when you're viewing a lower resolution version of a video shots, and collaborative work are common practices. And doing this using the internet was the way in which people were able to continue a lot of the work, whatever work they were able to do on the production sets, although oftentimes these things got shut down if somebody got sick, for example. So these are some of the examples, some of the things that have changed. Again, this is from Jeff Schwartz from Deloitte, the future of work in 2021 from the January CES. He said some of those trends we saw before were accelerated then with COVID. So 3 in 4 CFOs intended to shift at least 25% of their employees to permanently remote positions, even after the COVID is finished. There was a 288%, this is in January 2021, 288% increase in stock price of Upwork since March. There was also 339% increase in stock price of Zoom since March last year. And 85% of CEOs say the company's digital transformation was significantly accelerated during the economic crisis. And 40% of CEOs say their investment priority post-pandemic is to spend more on IT infrastructure and platforms. So that means we're going to see more and more of this digital transformation, and technology will be a very important way in which we work. Now, before COVID, remote work was about 3 to 5%. And after COVID, it was 50%, according to a Deloitte survey. And again, CEOs tend to move at least 25% workforce permanently offsite. And a lot of companies, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit, are moving to a hybrid model with employees working at home at least 2 days a week. Uber and Apple have said they're going to do that. And according to a Mercury News article on June 2nd, an Uber executive said that some employees find it easier to separate work life if they're in the office. Some people actually find it easier to juggle if it's at home. So different people have different preferences in the ways that they work. Google CEO Sundar Pichai said in a note to employees that he expects 60% of the company's global workforce will return to their pre-pandemic offices a few days a week, while 20% will move to a different office and the remaining 20% will work from home. Twitter and Facebook are both planning on some employees working remotely forever if their roles allow it. And HP, of course, there's been some discussion of that in the chat. For instance, HP and Oracle both announced that they're moving their headquarters to Texas. So interesting trends that have been happening here. Here's another one of these Deloitte slides. People worked more hours overall, it seemed, during COVID. And according to their surveys, 48.5-minute increase in average workday length since COVID-19, with 13% more meetings each day. And so people are actually, in some respects, working harder, and they're also working at home. Some people can separate the work and life, but it's complicated. Like your pets are crawling around you and kids in the background, that kind of thing. So there's been lots of stress and some mental health issues for some people, and also issues about balancing work and family. There also is something called Zoom fatigue or technology fatigue, that is, for instance, sitting too long in teleconferences. Anyway, the distractions, loss of focus. You can see here some examples here where some of the biggest challenges they faced: isolation, physical isolation, and blurred line again between work and life. Adjusting to new working dynamics and having inadequate technology was another factor. We had some discussion of this earlier as well. Based upon a February 2021 Mercury News article, by October of 2020, 8.93 million people moved in the US since the pandemic began in March. According to analysis of United States Postal Service change of addresses, this was an increase of nearly 94,000 from the same period the prior year. Contracts from moving van company Atlas Van Lines and U-Haul show that people who chose to move to a new state headed away from the population centers on the coast, with New York and California losing the most residents in 2020. And a National Association of Realtors report found newly untethered remote workers left big cities for the suburbs. So this pattern is expected to continue into 2021, according to that National Association of Realtors, with more people deciding where they live based on their own personal needs instead of their commuting time to work. That could mean long-term growth for suburbs and smaller cities. Idaho, interestingly enough, topped Atlas's list for states with the most inbound moves, meaning more moving trucks are arriving in the state than leaving it. Also in the top 10 were North Carolina, Maine, Alabama, and New Mexico. So I thought those were interesting things to discuss there. Now, another factor in terms of some of the things that are going on, I've been able to participate in an IEEE organized series of virtual meetings with leaders in industry, government, and other sectors. And they've been talking with people from all over the world. The goal was to discuss with those attendees the combination of economic, ecological, technological, and societal factors and enabling technological innovations that would result in a major shift in the future of the workforce, and to get recommendations from the participants. And the image you see here, I call this is a Roberto Sirocco's mandala. There's this IEEE volunteer from Italy named Roberto Sirocco, and he's actually got a reference from him at the end here. Been very involved in the Digital Reality Initiative and various Future Directions Initiative and the IEEE. And one of the things he did here was to try to show relationships, that's where all these lines are, between ecological, economic, societal, and technological factors. So it ends up being kind of a complicated drawing there, but this is sort of the kind of things that are setting the pace for these discussions that we were doing all over the world. So I'd like to share some ideas I picked up from these discussions, and I won't talk about which regions they're from, but they're just some general ideas that I thought might be interesting, showing a more international perspective. So the best results we're seeing as one of the responses, best results are from a balance of work at home and some days a week in the office. There's challenges to creating a group identity, however, if everyone works remotely. And online activity creates new risks, things that can happen like Zoom bombing or security issues that are not usual in face-to-face interactions. Some nations were hit hard by the pandemic and are projected to have economic contractions of over 10%. In some places, many jobs are manual labor, and those will be impacted by automation. Again, one of the responses in technology that's being made as a result of the pandemic. In some places, more women lost their jobs than men during the pandemic. In some countries that have a high percentage of informal employment, the general population was hit very hard when those went away. They didn't have any regular employee backup. They were basically informal employees. And in some locations, imported devices, the technology, for instance, that we in the US might take for granted, are beyond the means of most people. Another set of comments: jobs that required multidisciplinary background, creativity, communication, empathy, and insight are emerging. New types of jobs, in other words. Virtual reality and augmented reality may make remote work more engaging and more like physical interaction. I'll talk more about that later. And of course, working at home, as we saw earlier from the Deloitte discussion, can impact work and life balance. In some countries, bandwidth connectivity is an issue, and even where there is good local connectivity, traffic often gets choked at the network backbone. And remote access to test equipment was brought up, for instance, is needed to enable more remote engineering type work. People working remotely this year had relied upon accrued social capital with colleagues, in other words, because they had known them before the pandemic, and clients, and that would need to be refreshed after we can go back to face-to-face contact. Just a few more, as unlike many other natural disasters, this pandemic has pushed people apart rather than bringing them together. And technology has been our means to connect with each other. One comment was that digital banking reached record levels during COVID-19 because people couldn't physically go into banks. And more businesses are implementing a permanent remote workforce, and resulting in downsizing of office rental space. And the workplace will not be the same. And the workforce depends upon technology, especially if we're going to enable more of this kind of thing. So that's kind of the sort of level set of what happened in the pandemic, and people's responses where it seems like things are going. So let's talk a bit about technologies for future work. And a lot of this is dependent upon bandwidth trends. So in 2012, according to Net Index, the overall download bandwidth worldwide was about 9 megabits per second, with the US average at that time download bandwidth is just under 12 megabits per second. According to Ookla, in September 2020, the average download bandwidth worldwide was about 85.73 megabits per second for fixed broadband connections, and about 36 megabits per second for mobile connections. So that's about 9.5x, almost a 10x improvement in average internet bandwidth in 9 years. If we project that kind of bandwidth increase in the future, in the next 9 years, say in 2029, we could have a fixed band broadband download bandwidth of about 840 megabits per second, closing in on 1 gigabit per second. This also sounds close to some of those numbers been parried around with 5G connectivity, which of course is a wireless connectivity as well. But again, that depends upon how good your connection is. So if we have higher bandwidth, what can we do with that? So here's some ideas. I'm going to go a little bit more into these things. And this is part of why I wanted to give this talk, because this kind of stuff interests me. We could create and use lifelike avatars of ourselves, or something that represents how we feel inside or whatever, for virtual reality meetings. We can incorporate more immersive video environments into our work and interactions. We can enable augmented reality for many business applications, including remote collaboration. Say, for instance, somebody is in a factory working on something. They might have a pair of smart glasses on with a camera. Somebody and communicating wirelessly connected to somebody else who can hear and see what they're doing. They can give them advice on things to do, stuff to look at, these sort of things that the technology will make possible. There's been, certainly in the media and entertainment space, 360-degree videos where you have cameras basically surrounding a whole scene and capturing everything, that we might be able to make use of for some applications. And also something called volumetric video, where you're capturing samples of all of the light rays coming off every object in an environment. You're capturing samples of those. So basically you can recreate a lifelike three-dimensional image of something using that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Also, advanced telepresence robots. For instance, a robot including video capture capabilities and high bandwidth communication can allow us to access and look at, for instance, a factory floor in another continent, or attend business meetings. And then remote controlling remote equipment that does precise work may be a possibility. People talked about doing remote surgery. The latencies may be an issue there, but there might be things that is accessible for, and also even for equipment maintenance, perhaps using surrogate robotic type devices. So I'm an old science fiction fan, so this stuff always appeals to me. Let's look at some of these a little more in depth. Virtual reality. Here's some examples of some virtual reality platforms. Here, there was an IEEE Spectrum article in April 2000 that was showing the Engage platform, the upper left-hand side there. MIT News was talking about spatial platform in 2020 as well. There's an example there. Some people looking at, I think it's supposed to be on Mars. Some physical people and some remote people that are showing up if you're wearing your glasses. And according to high-speed internet, the minimum speed for video conferencing is 1 megabit per second, but 3 megabit per second is better. So that's for things like what we're doing now. In order to play a virtual reality video at 240p, which is not a very high resolution, a bandwidth of 25 megabits per second is required, with an increase of bandwidth to 1 gigabit per second for the equivalent of 4K resolution. In virtual reality, on the edge, how to deliver it. So this is the reference there from August 2017. And a high resolution virtual reality meeting would require close to 10 times the bandwidth of a regular video conference. So doing things like we're doing now, but seeming even more lifelike, will require more bandwidth. Kind of things we knew anyway, but these are some numbers that to keep in mind here. Remote collaborative tools, collaboration tools of various sorts. Virtual reality can be used for various types of work like this. Many of you have seen scenes in movies, where they're working with things that are in the air, whether it be Tony Stark, in Marvel, or at Minority Report, for example. In practice, there's a concept called digital twins, which create very realistic models of anything, of a product that can be worked on remotely, and features that could be traded off and discussed. For instance, like you see somebody in the upper right-hand side here, looking at a shoe design, for example, and talking about its features. And also collaborative tools, maybe simple things like Slack or Discord, that provide text collaboration. And there's even before the pandemic hit, it was often easier just to text somebody from where you were sitting at versus getting up and going over to talk to them, and having an online communication and a record of what you did and that kind of things. Then there's some things that are even more interesting, though, how you might use these in a business setting might, other than for entertainment, might be need to think about that. But LED panels, there's an industry now making very large LED panels. Some people use these to decorate their houses, for example, but they can also be used to they actually provide light and their display devices. And they've been used for emulating, say, non-existent environments. For instance, here we see scenes from The Mandalorian that were being in there using LED panels to replicate some of the environment around them. And on the right-hand side there, we show green screens. You can have, like right now, in fact, I have a green screen behind me, and basically that helps to get a stable background that the green screen can be, you can take what's in the green screen, move it into another environment, or put another environment on the green screen. So we show the tops, this guy on the green screen. Down below, we show him embedded into a space, maybe in the White House, for example. And so these are being used in media and entertainment. They might have some applications also when you think about how to make more immersive types of business environments. And virtual reality and 360-degree video, of course, is interesting. So if you 360-degree video is made by capturing content from multiple cameras, and it's a driving force the creation of modern virtual reality content. It may also provide raw data that can be processed and used to create perspectives from anywhere within a field of view of a group of synchronized cameras focused on a scene. That's called a free viewpoint video. And virtual reality and 360-degree video projects require capturing simultaneous content from many cameras at once. Sporting and other multi-party events also use multiple cameras. And it's, for instance, if I wanted to wear some VR glasses and I want to have 8K per eye, I may need something like a 16 by 8K video, say capture equivalent of that. And the raw video footage from these multiple cameras can result in lots of storage, but also require lots of bandwidth to move it around. And
so Tom,
yeah,
Brian Berg here. Yeah,
yes.
You've been talking a lot, and I realize there's questions that are building up.
Yeah.
So can we?
Do you want to answer some of them now?
Well, let's see. Some of these get kind of stale after a while because you're covering so many topics. So I was figuring I should interrupt you if I could. So we have one here that says, how do you expect technical conferences to change post-pandemic other than there being more hybrid online and offline events?
I think we're going to see, first of all, I think we are going to see more hybrid and online versus physical events. For one thing, being someone who organizes the events, it's cheaper to do that. And that's an attraction in terms of the risk of running something. However, I think we're going to see, and there's already been some developments of things for people to interact in sort of natural social ways, to have breaks. These have various degrees of success, but I think there's ways in which we could make them even more like I'm actually talking to individual human beings. There's spatial chat, for example, that you see a picture of yourself, you can move it close to somebody else's picture, and then they can hear you better than they could if you're further away, and so you can kind of have an interaction. But I think we're going to get a lot better at making those things, and that's where some of these things like the virtual reality, I think, could really, if we have the bandwidth and the capability of doing this, I think it could really make that much more potentially immersive. I see someone, Marion said they couldn't see the slides, and can everyone else see the slides?
That has been resolved now. Marion was
okay.
Get in now.
Okay.
Thank you.
And there's another one. Let's see, Larry England, believe the pandemic accelerated the acceptance of certain technologies like a virtual doctor's visit. Whether technologies fall into this category or those we can see on the horizon. I think there's a lot of them that fall into that category. I mean, for me, every visit I was doing this last year or so has been virtual. So I think it's a definite trend. Now, the issue, of course, is you don't have the same kind of contact when you have that personal face-to-face type contact, that we use to establish empathy or a feeling of trust with somebody. So we got to find new ways of creating those kind of clues. And part of that is maybe, that we could be seeing each other as actual three-dimensional beings versus just, a face on a screen. Of course, then you could see that you're not wearing any pants and you've got sandals on, but, but I think if we could find more ways of letting people interact with each other in a more lifelike way, I think, using these technologies, that will make this easier to do it. So that's some of the answers to the questions. I'll be glad to take more later on. And thank you, Brian, for getting a hold of me on that. Let's see, I'm going to move on from this one. Let's see. One more on the wild technology stuff, and that is this idea of volumetric video. So at the 2016 NAB show, there's a company called Lytro, which is a San Francisco Bay Area imaging startup. It's now defunct. that was demonstrating their Lytra camera, cinema cameras, about the size of a small Jeep, that could that they were looking at to revolutionize video capture and post-production, and also give a big boost in storage. It also, of course, would require a lot of storage and bandwidth to move this stuff around. So this Lytra video camera used an array of micro lenses and light sensors to capture samples of all the rays of light within a scene, which can be used to create the captured content, focusing on any element within the field of view and allowing content features, editing features, for example, not possible after shooting with a conventional video camera. So the size of they were doing 4K video at the time, and the size of individual frames was 715 megabytes each. And the video was shot at 24 frames per second. So at 24 frames per second, that comes to a data rate of about 17.2 gigabytes per second. That's of the raw content. So at this data rate, an hour of content would be about 62 terabytes of storage. So Lytra no longer exists, but other companies are still pursuing this volumetric or light field imaging is another name for it, including Intel. They had sessions of this topic at recent industry events. And they also, in addition to some other folks, they have a 10,000 square foot, 4-story volumetric capture studio in LA with over 100 high resolution cameras looking at the scene. What's particularly impressive for this technology, from a storage point of view, because that is what I do during my day job, is the size of the captured content. A company called Lightfield Labs, another Bay Area startup by one of the founders, Lytro founders, at a 2019 conference indicated more than a 540K, that's like 4K, video display would be required for a video experience similar to the Star Trek holodeck, hence the image on the right-hand side. So this is taking that technology potentially to the extreme. Where could things go? What could be enabled? Yes, someone's saying, I knew someone with Lytro. Sorry, they went belly up. Indeed, it's an interesting technology, but there are, as in many cases, one outfit dies, new ones spring up from its ashes, and there's still work going on in these areas. So another area we talked about was advanced robots. So telepresence robots, and this ties into these remote visits, is that remote doctor visits, you're just sitting down and talking to somebody. But what if you could actually move around with a robot? So and if you've been to some conferences, like some of us have been before the pandemic, Santa Clara Convention Center, you could rent out these telepresence robots that you could move around and talk with people and go places, for example. Automation in factories and supply chains can reduce some of the dependence on humans. And again, people trying to run factories during the pandemic, there was an extra impetus for automation. And robots also are being used for human care, for instance, in Japan, which has an aging population. And maybe these could also be used for remote contact and interactions for family members, using the robot as a way of actually physically interacting with their loved one. So, and robots and automation often use AI. So I'm going to be getting into some of that too in this next section here. Can we find the right blend, for instance, of automation of AI in human activity? And that's a real key, because where things are going to go. Let's see. Carol also has another comment in there on the Q&A about volumetric video startups, I believe. So let's talk about the impact on mankind of the changes that have been wrought, and the changes that may come because of the technologies that are inspired by us not working directly with each other. So how could these trends from remote work and less travel impact our culture? So some possible impacts on cities is there's a potential for less traffic. I know for many of us, for instance, in the Bay Area, it was amazing how few cars were on the road, during many of the months where the pandemic was the worst. Less traffic, less pollution. I remember that the people were saying, the seismologists were saying the earth was shaking less. Could the trend to restrict traffic and allow larger areas for outdoor dining, for instance, continue? A lot of people kind of like this idea of being able to eat outdoors. Could we see even more of that? Will we have fewer fixed office spaces with people not in there all the time? Is there going to be less need for commercial real estate and parking? There's a comment earlier by somebody saying in Palo Alto, a lot of buildings boarded up. I've seen a lot of commercial property, especially ones where they have these small offices that are seem like there's nobody in many of them. Could this lead to getting rid of some of these buildings, getting rid of some of this parking and perhaps more open areas in cities, making them a more natural environment perhaps? And with many people moving out of the cities, and often the best paid people on the other hand, how does that impact the tax base, the public services, and the people that are left behind? So possible impacts on travel: if we have more advanced telecommunication technology, in general, will the need for work air travel decline? How much of that will happen, and for who will that happen? So here's Jeff Swartz again from Deloitte at this January CES, and his point is, in a sense, we're in a world of perpetual disruption. I think we need to have a mindset that deals with that, as things are constantly changing, and organizations must adopt a mindset shift from focus on surviving to how do I thrive, even while things are disrupting. So surviving is, he points out, is a point in time crises expectation that the organization will revert to business as usual. In other words, we'll get back to the way we did things once things change. Thriving, his point is that disruption will be continuous. It's not just an episode, and you need to embrace that as a catalyst to move forward, to change, to do new things. Another slide, actually from his colleague, Robin Jones, who spoke at this January CES, is that people have to learn on the fly. The marketplace responses require forming teams on a dime. In other words, people are going to have to change things they do very, very quickly. And there's a way to accelerate that. This is a way to accelerate, to transform work and unleash your workforce. Part of the reason why I have the talk there. And an example of this is the vaccine production. It involved people working in ways they had not worked with before, with new technological tools, collaborations that span many different types of organizations, many disciplines, in order to create a whole bunch of vaccines for the COVID in a relatively short period of time. And we need to think of re-architecting work so it's better for humans at the same time. It's got to deal and embrace disruption, but we need to put people in the center. And treating workforce development, how we grow the workforce, how we teach people that we want them to work, as a way to build resilience into the workforce. And every worker may be asked to make a pivot, no matter what their original jobs, to solve a critical need for the organization. And that requires that the workers have agency, that be able to make decisions, be able to have the resources, training, to be able to do things on their own. So they must, and workers oftentimes like this. They want growth and development through their work experience. They want their work not just to be a boring thing where I'm doing the same thing all the time, but something where I learn stuff, I'm doing exciting things. And if those factors are combined with what people are passionate about, the reason why their purpose for life, the things that they love to do, that could be transformative. So those are some of the points that are being made is, what could come out of the changes in work, of the application of the new technology. Another important factor is artificial intelligence. Most new work approaches are using increased levels of artificial intelligence, but in a sense, artificial intelligence is IQ. It's a machine that's able to process, know things, that kind of stuff, but it doesn't have emotional intelligence or emotional quotient or empathy quotient. It doesn't know how to deal with people, but we are a world of people. And combining the IQ, if you will, of AI with the EQ of humans could create, again, it's disruptive, but it creates potential of enormous value. Humans and their machines could be a super team that can do things that would not be possible otherwise. And AI can help humans to understand and react to these kind of disruptive things like we're going through right now. And actually, at the 2017 IEEE Sections Congress in Australia, there's this fellow named Alan Finkel, who's then the chief scientist for the Australian government. He gave a keynote talk, and he was focusing on this humans and AI. And he said that because of AI, old jobs will disappear, including creative jobs, including jobs where you need to know things. But despite the challenges, he said that we can find ways to be better than our brilliant machines for generations to come. And not just better than our machines, better off because of those machines. And we can be better, therefore, together. And we can do this because we speak fluent humans and we live in a human world. A robot that says that science is fun is delivering a line. A human who says that science is fun is telling you something about what it means for that person to be alive. So humans can be better than brilliant. And automation hasn't killed artisan work, for instance, things that people love to do with their hands, their minds. It actually may enable people to spend more time on things that they love to do. And also humans are flexible and effective in human settings, which machines don't know how to do yet. There's a 2017 IEEE ethically aligned design that's actually another one of the references here. It starts with this statement: human well-being is the highest virtue for the society, and human flourishing begins with conscious contemplation. To survive and prosper, humans need to be more capable, not less. We need to skill up, not dumb down. Again, to work with those machines to be able to deal better with these disruptions that will continue to happen. On the other hand, we also face issues with access to the technologies that are enabling these things. Higher bandwidth allows amazing remote experiences. Even more bandwidth will allow even more amazing things like we discussed, but 77 million Americans don't have high-speed internet connections, according to Mashable in April 2021. Worldwide, almost half the human population has no access to the internet, and fewer than 1 in 5 people in the least developed countries are connected, according to the World Economic Forum. There's a significant divide between those with good internet access and those with limited or no internet access. In the current pandemic, those without good connectivity experienced significant economic impacts. Their children had difficulty accessing remote learning. These people couldn't participate very well in remote work, even if their work could be done remotely. So part of the people who lost their jobs are those who did not have these kind of resources. So these technologies are good for some. Can they be good for all? Undoubtedly, improvements in technology in wealthier areas will also improve the level of technologies in other places over time. By increasing the volume of these technological resources, you lower the cost, it can get into more places. Also, increasing connections with more people and places will increase the international business opportunities, but unconnected people won't be part of this new economy. So we need technologies that will enable the rest of the world to get connected so that everyone can participate in this future work that's going to be so immersed in the technologies used to do it. These might include satellites like Elon Musk's Starlink. Balloons and solar-powered drones are another possible approaches to give connectivity to those who don't have it now. More people connected means a bigger economy, more customers, more potential, more possibilities of genius, of people who otherwise could not be enabled to make an impact. And it creates more business opportunities. So that's my basic talk here. And in summary, the COVID pandemic accelerated trends that are often described as this digital transformation. And for many workers, remote work will be far more common after the pandemic. That'll cause people to consider where they want to live and how they want to live. International remote work, advanced telecommunications, and AI will be important factors in future work, and movements to more bandwidth will enable more immersive and capable remote interactions. Remote work and less travel could have an enormous impact on work, cities, travel, and the environment. And disruption and teaming of AI and humans will be key drivers for new ways to work. But we need to think about how we can make this more inclusive. How can we improve the economic opportunities for more people that we will need to create? And we need to create ways to connect those who are not yet connected so they can be part of this new economy. So with that, these are some of these references. Work Disrupted by Jeffrey Schwartz. This is the CES folks, actually a book from Wiley this year. Megatrends from 2021 to 2030. Roberto Sirocco, this is actually available for free, IEEE Future Directions. More from Less, Andrew McAfee, Simon & Schuster, and then this Ethically Aligned Design, which is an IEEE document from 2017 that I referenced. And then I wrote the thing about the Australian keynote speaker I wrote as an IEEE transmitter article in September 2017, The Role of the Human in Artificial Intelligence. So with that, I want to thank you folks, and I'm glad to take more questions. Daryl Dela Cruz, given periodic pandemics, climate change, migration, and politics, to what extent do you see more private and/or public investment in the U.S. machine learning chip industry? I think we're definitely seeing, a lot. So there's been a shortage of chips. For instance, you might have heard in the automotive industry, a lot of those chips are the AI, ADAS type applications. They're the sophisticated chips SOCs that allow advanced AI functions. So I think we're going to see a lot more of AI built into various types of chips. Machine learning, of course, is going to be one of the most used ways for both training and also inference devices to use that training. I hope I answered that question. Let's see, Dave. Advocates of lean startup methodologies always talk about getting out of the building to understand what customers want. How do you see this changing as more people are working at home? Are there any practical ways to do customer research remotely? That's a really good question. How do you get sort of random interaction with people or even planned interaction with people if you can't go there? And I think that maybe that's, you might think about that as a potential business opportunity of being done by business that has some value. So maybe it's some economic reward for people that volunteer to do this. I know that people do this on surveys now. Could we find more ways of developing those concepts? That might be one answer to that. In order to compete with more non-democratic influences. I'm not sure what the reference was there, but I think the general reference is that my feeling is that a free people have more permission, in a sense, to develop ideas and concepts than those that are more regulated and more restrained. They have more options open to them, if indeed they are free. And as a consequence, they're more likely to find solutions or different solutions than you would if you have restrictions on the things you can consider doing because of, say, a non-democratic government. So I think that, by responding to these things, using our freedoms to look for new opportunities and ways to bring these technologies to more people, including those who are not connected today, that we will do an enormous amount to boost the idea of the value of freedom, of how it enables people to do things they could not do otherwise. Anyway, I hope that's my own feelings, but I hope that kind of answers your questions there. There's a question, do you expect less full-time employees and more contractors and technical work in the future? I think there has been a trend towards that. I believe that there's going to continue to be a trend towards that. And for various reasons, for some technologies, people only need those kind of expertise sometimes, and therefore it's easier for them to rent it out, if you will, than to basically own it. And for other things, it's that things are changing so fast that finding the people that I think organizations are going to be looking for ways that they could not have these long time ties to people in many regards, but sometimes they will. It's complicated. There's a lot of different parts of it. And I think that, but I think there is a trend for there being an awful lot more work for people that do consulting contractor work, like many of us on the phone here. I believe that is a long-term trend. Is there new information on rules for reentry? For instance, today's new rules, your thoughts? Yeah. The thing I really wish I was better at is this whole, how to actually program and implement artificial intelligence and machine learning, because I really think that there's that would have an enormous value for somebody who trying to participate in this market. I understand the principles, but I don't know. I never seem to be able to find the time to actually sit down and fiddle around with this stuff and figure out how to do it. But I think if you can, that will give you an enormous value and advantage in many cases. Hope that helps Jessica on there.
Tom, there's also one from Ben that's over in the chat. What do you think will be the impact of semi-autonomous vehicles on the future of work?
Semi-autonomous vehicles, I think, I think it could, well, it's going to impact Uber drivers and Lyft drivers, sure.
and Domino's pizza delivery.
And Domino's pizza delivery, yeah. So it's going to have an impact.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it could potentially be safer, especially if they're all autonomous, assuming that the algorithms work well and they can deal with people in the dark that come out of nowhere. So I think, I mean, that's the whole point here is that we're going to end up with disruptions, both natural and made by us. And, that's going to be more of the future. And it's something we've got to know, we've got to be ready for, we've got to expect it. We got to prepare for how to deal with it, and also be ready to deal with it emotionally and intellectually, be ready to deal with that and respond with other people to to thrive in that kind of environment, if at all possible. Which high-tech manufacturing areas see coming back from Asia, for instance? Potentially, I mean, there's talk about semiconductor moving back here, especially like to Texas. There's a few companies that have talked about setting up stuff there. So I think there may be, for many different reasons, that there's, you know, some of these are, you know, people worried about security, supply chain, and things of that sort, that people are looking at moving more stuff back. And if it's an automated factory, you know, or a high degree of automation, that although land and some of these other costs are of course important factors in the cost of factory, it does reduce at least the potential of labor contribution. But on the other hand, the other thing is we've been so successful at exporting manufacturing that the cost of living and the price of labor in the places where they do this is increased. So they aren't necessarily as low labor as they used to be. So there are factors actually that I think that favor or make it easier to think about reshoring, you know, versus you know, manufacturing in Asia. So I think we're going to see some trends towards that, and it's going to be interesting to see. But I don't think it's going to be like what factories used to look like in the future. I mean, the past rather. You know, the future is going to be different. You can almost count on that. The future is, you know, has resemblances to the past, but it has characteristics that are going to, and things will not work the way they used to work. They'll work in some different way. A remote pair program.
If I can add one comment, like with the pandemic, one thing we saw is that even low cost things, PPE and stuff, the supply chain was out of this country. We didn't have it here. And that caused a big disruption with a lot of things. I mean, masks and a number of others. I have one colleague from Georgia Tech, and he helped to co-found a company in Marietta, Georgia last year that would make PPE masks, in particular N95 masks, with US source material in the US. So there would be, you know, a link here in the US for a source for that.
Yeah.
I think there's got to be one of the issues. There's got to be things like that that are looked at and addressed. You know, there's too many things that you just suddenly lose the transportation component, or you lose whatever it is that shuts it down and breaks the system that we have been using.
Yeah, and we've also been seeing, you know, where the security issues, like you know, the pipeline that got shut down on the East Coast. Yeah, Colonial Pipeline, and meatpacking plant that was impacted. So, you know, having secure telecommunications and other infrastructure is going to be a real key, you know, to the functioning of a society that's so dependent upon technology. Our technology needs to be reliable, needs to be trustworthy, and right now there's a lot of holes in it. And you know, it could use some work. There's another comment on, will wealth or income become more concentrated? I would like to hope, you know, and maybe this is the classical liberal side of me, that as we create more capabilities of generating wealth, we will raise more people up from poverty and create a larger middle class. You know, there will be, I think it's, you know, there will be wealthy people. Hopefully there are people that deserve the wealth they have. But I'd also like to think that that if we do this right, we can create enormous opportunities for everybody from any walk of life, from any background. You know, at least that's my hope, that what we can do. Now, remote pair programming work as well as in-person pair programming. I'm not sure I know what you're talking about there, Dave, on the pair programming. Oh, and then there's one about Zoox being acquired by Amazon. Any news about they were going to have a factory in Fremont? I don't know about that one. But, you know, one of the things about living in this area and not having moved out of here yet is that there's so much stuff that happens around here in Silicon Valley. And it still is a lot of venture capital, a lot of innovative folks. Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more people in other places doing this. Hopefully we've exported the revolution to elsewhere. But I see, that there's still an awful lot of momentum, a lot of activity and history and practices here that favor technology development in the Bay Area, like we've had, for the last 60, 70 years, for example. So hopefully we'll be able to continue that, even though I believe it's going to get stronger in other places as well. Pair programs, two people working on the same program together at the same time. Got it. Yeah, that's an area, it seems to me, that if we did it right, that you could do that virtually. People, I'm trying to think of good ways in which it will seem like you're not constrained by the teleconference capability. Like you can actually see your keyboard. Because I think part of it's, I can see what the other person is actually doing, which, for instance, the way we're doing it right now, we can't. So if I actually had something that's more like my avatar, I could see my avatar right next to your avatar, and I can see what you're doing, at least, waist up or something like that, that might help to give you more of that kind of experience. I don't know if that works, but that's, I'm thinking that, Dave.
Tom, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Given, we're sort of towards the end of our careers, but, I got started in a company and got a lot of training through a company and so forth. And that was sort of the, and mentors, people telling me what to do in the office and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
How is this changing for new employees? My son's graduating in a week, and what can he expect as he goes into the workforce? It's different from what I encountered 30 years ago.
Yeah, that human interaction helps people become friends and helps them to develop relationships like mentor-mentees. And not physically being able to see people has been a real problem, I think. And remember, one of those comments was people are using the human capital they developed before the pandemic to be able to get through the pandemic, but when we can come together again, I don't think we can ever totally not interact with each other. But for instance, if you're 3 days a week in the office and 2 days out of the office, you still can get that kind of personal interaction with people, which I do think it's, for many people, that is, and many people in many kind of jobs, that is very important. Maybe not for everybody, but certainly for a lot of folks. And I also think it does help, like, new workers to, be able to understand more of what's going on when they can tag along with someone, or, easily get advice from somebody. But maybe we'll also develop applications and things that allow us to do that, even when we're not physically close to each other. Maybe we can find ways that we can match people with similar aptitudes in an organization that might be friends, if we knew how to figure that out, and help them to become so, even though they're not physically able to get together. But for right now, I think, it's been a hardship for many folks not to have that physical interaction. And so getting back to some of that, I think, will be good. Maybe not where I'm having to drive into work every day. Not having to do that will also be good. So some kind of mix, I think, will become a lot more common than it was.
Yeah, my sense is some companies really figured out how to do onboarding remotely over the last year, but there's others that basically haven't, sort of haven't hired or haven't figured it out.
Yeah. Well, and some outfits are going to succeed in a given environment, given circumstances. Some won't. That's, the experimental method is, and part of it is that you need to try things. You need to experiment and see things that work. Then follow your intuitions and discard them if they don't seem to work out, and find new ideas. That's part of what's made this particular area that we live in, or this particular mindset associated with people in this area, stand out in a way, is that people are willing to fail and move on and learn new things.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay,
there's a comment. Maybe companies will have a daily social hour to get that personal touch. Yeah, maybe including people physically and virtually, would be good. When we get free floating holographic images, that will help.
all right. If there's no other questions, I think we're done with this. Thank you very much, Tom. This has been really interesting. I think we all got a lot out of this. Just a reminder to those of you listening, our next meeting will be in September. A lot of interesting stuff here. Again, welcome all of you to join CNSV, and our thanks to Tom for this presentation. Thank you, Tom.
Chris. Thank you, Chris, and thanks to everyone, CNSV, and for everyone who attended.